The first snowfall of the season always had a quiet kind of magic that seemed to wrap the whole town in a gentle blanket. The roads softened under white layers, rooftops shimmered like powdered sugar, and even the air felt calmer, as if winter itself wanted everyone to slow down. For most people, this change was simply part of life, a shift from one season to another. But for one young pianist in the town, winter meant something much deeper. It felt like a doorway to peace, a reminder to breathe, to reflect, and to rediscover the little things that often got lost in the rush of the year. The pianist lived in a small house tucked between two tall pine trees. The home wasn't fancy or grand, but it was warm, filled with books, soft blankets, and the gentle scent of tea that was almost always brewing in the kitchen. The living room held the pianist's most prized possession, an old wooden piano passed down from a relative. It had scratches along the edges and keys that had slightly faded from years of use, but its sound carried a warmth that no new instrument could match. On the first quiet day of winter, the pianist sat by the window, watching snowflakes drift down like slow-moving stars. A mug of hot tea warmed their hands, and the soft crackling sound from the heater added a comforting background hum. It was the kind of day when the world felt still, like everything had paused for a moment as they looked out at the white-covered street. An old classical piece started playing from a little speaker on the table beside them. They hadn't chosen the song, simply played from a playlist that had been running in the background for hours. But something about this piece felt different. The soft opening melody flowed like the quiet snowfall outside, each note settling gently in the air. The pianists closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. The notes carried memories, some clear, some blurry, but still warm. This piece had once comforted them during a difficult time years ago. It had played on the radio late one night. When they were younger, sitting awake after a tiring day, unsure of what the future held. Back then, something in the melody had made them feel understood, even though no words were spoken. It was the first moment they realized music wasn't just sound. It was emotion, memory, and connection. Listening again now, with snow falling outside, the pianist felt that same warmth return. It wasn't dramatic or overwhelming. It was simple, steady, like a hand resting gently on their shoulder. They found themselves wondering how many other people had felt that same calm from this piece, how many lives had been touched by the timeless beauty of classical music. Winter had always brought out this reflective side of the pianist. Something about the slower days made it easier to look inward, to appreciate the things that often went unnoticed. They loved watching the town shift into its winter rhythm. Kids playing in the snow, neighbors greeting each other with smiles, families stepping out with scarves wrapped tightly around them. Even small sounds felt louder and more meaningful in the crisp winter air. As the classical piece continued, the pianist walked over to the piano and gently lifted the wooden cover. They placed their fingers on the keys, pressing a few notes softly. The sound echoed lightly in the quiet room. They weren't trying to play the whole piece. They simply wanted to feel the music with their own hands. For years, playing the piano had been their way of expressing emotions they couldn't always put into words. Happiness, fear, excitement, loneliness, every feeling seemed to flow more clearly when translated into sound. But recently, life had become busier, and the pianist noticed they hadn't played as much. There were always things that needed attention: work, errands, responsibilities, decisions. Days slipped by quickly, leaving little time for the things that once brought comfort. This winter afternoon felt like a reminder, gentle nudge to return to what mattered. The pianist played a few measures from memory, hesitating at places where their hands weren't as confident as before. But even the mistakes felt beautiful. The music filled the room with a soft glow, warm and reflective. After a while, the pianist stopped playing and let their hands rest. They looked around the room, realizing how peaceful everything felt. The snowfall, the music, the quietness. It was as if winter had created a small pocket of calm just for them. For the first time in months, they didn't feel the pressure of unfinished tasks or upcoming deadlines. They simply felt present. As the day passed, the pianist found themselves returning again and again to the thought of how classical music had shaped so many parts of their life. Not just their personal journey, but moments shared with others. They remembered playing for a neighbor once during a difficult time. Watching tears gather in the neighbor's eyes as a soft melody brought back memories of a loved one. They remembered performing a cheerful piece for a small group of kids at the library, watching their eyes light up with curiosity. They remembered practicing alone late at night, letting their feelings flow freely through the keys. It became clear that classical music wasn't just something they enjoyed. It was something that had woven itself into the story of their life. Later that evening, as the sky darkened and the streetlights flickered on, the pianist lit a small lamp beside the piano. The golden glow made the room feel even warmer against the cold night outside. They sat down again, this time with a soft determination. They didn't plan to practice perfect melodies. They simply wanted to reconnect with music. To let it guide them through the winter season ahead, they began playing another classical piece, one that had always reminded them of calm mornings. The melody drifted gently, creating a peaceful atmosphere that felt almost tangible. With each note, the pianist felt a growing clarity, a sense that this winter was going to be different, not because of big events or dramatic changes, but because they were finally giving themselves space to breathe, to reflect, and to return to what brought them joy. The pianist continued playing until the night grew late. The room remained quiet except for the soft hum of the heater and the gentle sound of the piano keys. When they finally closed the piano cover, they felt lighter, as if something long neglected inside them had finally been given attention. Sitting once more by the window, they watched the snow settle on the streets. The world outside glowed under the streetlights, soft and peaceful. The pianist held their warm mug between their hands and listened as another classical piece began to play from the little speaker. This time, they smiled. They knew they weren't just listening to music, they were reconnecting with a part of themselves. In that simple winter night, the pianist understood something important. Sometimes the calmest moments are the ones that change us the most. Sometimes peace arrives quietly, without fanfare, without noise. It slips in gently, like snowflakes landing on the ground. It reminds us to slow down, to listen, to feel, and to appreciate the beauty in small things. And so the first part of their winter journey began, not with a big decision, but with a quiet rediscovery of music, a soft promise to themselves, a deep breath taken in the stillness of a snowy evening. It was the beginning of something meaningful, something that would grow through each winter day that followed, as the night deepened. The pianist felt grateful for the season ahead. Winter was no longer just cold weather. It was a calm space, a gentle invitation to reconnect with memories, emotions, and the timeless beauty of classical music that had always been there, waiting to be heard again. The days that followed moved slowly, the way winter often made time feel softer, as if each hour lingered a little longer than usual. The town settled deeper into the season, with roofs carrying thicker blankets of snow and the air growing colder with each passing night. Yet inside the pianist's small home, warmth continued to spread, not just from the heater or the tea that kept steaming on the kitchen counter, but from a renewed sense of connection to music. Every morning, the pianist woke to the quiet sound of the wind brushing against the windows. Before doing anything else, they played a classical piece on a small speaker, something gentle to start the day. The melodies had become part of their routine again, filling the early hours with a sense of peace that made the rest of the day feel lighter. But as winter deepened, something else began to happen. The pianist started noticing how each classical piece brought back a different kind of memory. Some pieces reminded them of childhood, others of old friendships, and some of quiet moments spent alone in reflection. It was fascinating how a few simple notes could open a whole world of emotions. One cold afternoon, while sipping warm tea near the window, the pianist heard a familiar piece begin to play. It was one they had listened to many years earlier during a trip to another town. That day they had wandered through narrow streets while snowflakes drifted down, and this melody had played softly in a little cafe they stepped into. The memory came back with surprising clarity, the warm glow of the cafe lights, the smell of baked bread, the sound of distant laughter, and the sense of comfort that had wrapped around them. It made the pianist think, if one piece could hold so much meaning for them, how many others around the world felt the same connection to it? How many people had tied that melody to their own stories, joys, or quiet moments of healing? The thought followed them throughout the day. Classical music was often seen as something old or distant, but the pianist realized it wasn't distant at all. It was deeply human. It carried emotions in ways words sometimes could in single quotes too. Later that week, the pianist met a neighbor while walking down the snowy street. They exchanged a simple greeting before the neighbor mentioned hearing piano music drifting through the cold air earlier that morning. "I heard you playing," the neighbor said with a warm smile. "It sounded peaceful. It reminded me of something I used to listen to years ago, when life felt a bit heavy." The pianist felt a quiet sense of warmth at that comment. It hadn't occurred to them that their music might reach beyond the walls of their home. Touching someone else in a small but meaningful way, that moment planted a seed in their mind. Maybe music wasn't meant to be kept only for themselves. Maybe it was something to be shared, something that could bring comfort to others the way it had comforted them. Inspired by that thought, the pianist began creating a personal playlist of classical pieces. Not just any pieces only, the ones that had made them feel something real. They wanted to gather melodies that felt like old friends. The kind of music people turned to when their heart needed calm or when their mind felt too crowded. As the pianist organized the playlist, each piece brought back a different memory. Some memories were from peaceful days, some from challenging moments, and some from times when they had simply needed quiet. But each one felt meaningful. The playlist slowly grew, becoming more than just a list of songs. It became a collection of stories, each melody connecting to a moment, to a feeling, to a part of life that had shaped the pianist in one way or another. Late one evening, while listening to the playlist, the pianists found themselves thinking about how universal music really was. Even without words, it could travel across countries, cultures, and generations, carrying the same emotional language. People from completely different worlds could still feel the same calm from a soft melody, or the same energy from an uplifting one. The pianist wondered if others around them had similar experiences, if their neighbors, friends, or even strangers in the town felt a personal connection to classical music in their own way. That curiosity stayed with them for days. One morning, the pianist visited the local bakery, which was always warm and full of comforting smells. As they waited in line, they overheard a young worker humming a classical tune softly while arranging pastries on a tray. It wasn't a modern song or something from the radio. It was an old classical piece, one the pianist recognized immediately. After paying for their bread, the pianist asked, "You know that melody?" The young worker smiled shyly. "My mother used to play it while cooking. When I hear it, it brings back good memories. So, I guess it stuck with me." That small conversation stayed with the pianist. It was another reminder that classical music lived quietly in people's memories, even when they didn't talk about it often. Over the next few days, the pianist started noticing these small connections everywhere. A child humming a melody while waiting with their parent. An older man tapping his fingers lightly on a bench while a classical tune played from someone's phone nearby. A friend mentioning how they used to study with soft piano music in the background. Each moment felt like a little thread connecting people through shared experiences. This pattern helped the pianist understand something important. Classical music wasn't outdated or forgotten. It was simply woven into everyday life in small, meaningful ways. That realization made the pianist feel closer to the people around them, even those they didn't know personally. It also sparked a new idea: maybe classical music could become a bridge between people. Something that brought them together during the quiet winter days. As another week of winter passed, the pianist began spending more time exploring classical pieces they hadn't heard in years. Some melodies made them smile instantly. Others stirred emotions they hadn't thought about in a long time. Each piece felt like a small door leading to a memory, a moment, or a lesson. One night, while sitting near the window with a notebook, the pianist decided to write down how each piece made them feel. Not in a complicated way, just simple thoughts. A note about how one melody reminded them of long walks in the snow, another about how a certain piece felt like sunrise after a difficult night, another about how a joyful composition reminded them of laughter shared with friends. These notes became the start of something personal and meaningful. The pianists realized they were forming a connection between life and music, stitching memories to melodies in a way that felt honest and human. But the most surprising part was how natural it felt. The more they wrote, the more they understood that classical music wasn't something separate from life. It was part of it. It had shaped their emotions, their decisions, and the way they saw the world. On another quiet evening, while listening to a gentle piece, the pianist felt a soft spark of inspiration. Maybe they could share these connections with others, not as lessons or instructions, but simply as stories. Stories about how music had helped them and maybe helped others too. This thought filled them with a quiet excitement. They didn't want to teach people about classical music in a complicated way. They wanted to create something human and warm, something that felt like sitting near a fireplace on a cold night and listening to someone share memories from the heart. The pianist knew that if they could share their own experiences in a simple, genuine way, maybe others would feel encouraged to share their stories too. Maybe music could create conversations filled with honesty and reflection. As they continued listening to their playlist, the winter night felt especially calm. Snowflakes drifted softly past the window, the streetlights glowing gently against the rising frost. Inside, the room was warm, filled with soft music and a growing sense of purpose. The pianist didn't know exactly what they would do yet, or how they would share these stories, but they felt a quiet certainty that something meaningful was beginning to take shape, something that connected music, memory, and the people around them. And in that peaceful winter night, the pianist understood that part of life's beauty comes from these small connections, tiny moments when something simple, like a classical melody, ties people together in ways they never expected. It wasn't just music anymore. It was a doorway to stories, emotions, and the hidden memories people carry quietly in their hearts. In this winter, the pianist was ready to explore those connections, one piece at a time. Winter continued to wrap the town in its soft quietness, and each day seemed to carry the same calm rhythm. But inside the pianist's heart, something new was forming, something gentle yet full of purpose. The playlist they had been building slowly had turned into a collection of memories, emotions, and small reflections that felt too meaningful to keep to themselves. Every melody had a story, and every story felt like it could touch someone else's life. One morning, while warming their hands around a mug of tea, the pianist sat near the window and watched the snow drift down in slow, steady flakes. The silence outside felt comforting. It was during moments like these that ideas seemed to come more clearly, as a soft classical piece played in the background. The pianist wondered what would happen if people in the town came together to listen to music and share their stories. Not in a formal way, not in a strict or serious setting, but in a warm, simple gathering where anyone could speak from the heart. The thought made the pianist smile. They imagined neighbors sitting together in a small room, older folks who lived alone, young students who hurried through their days, families who carried stories they never shared. Music could bring them all together in a way that felt natural. It didn't matter if they knew much about classical music. What mattered was how the melodies made them feel. The idea stayed with the pianist as they moved through their day. While cooking, while cleaning, while practicing a short piece on the piano, the thought returned again and again. By the afternoon, the pianist decided to take a small step. They would start something simpler, winter meeting, where anyone interested could gather too. Listen to a few classical pieces and talk about what those melodies meant to them. But even a simple idea felt intimidating at first. The pianist wasn't used to organizing events or bringing people together. They were comfortable in their quiet routine, happy to spend evenings alone with their piano and their thoughts. Yet something inside told them that this idea wasn't just about them. It was about the town, the people, and the calm that music could bring into their lives. For years, pianists had watched people rushing through winter, carrying silent worries and unspoken memories. Maybe music could give them a place to breathe. The pianist began by speaking to a neighbor who lived across the street. They explained their idea gently, unsure of how it would be received. To their surprise, the neighbor's eyes lit up. "That sounds lovely," the neighbor said. "I think people could use something like that, especially during winter." The encouragement gave the pianist confidence. They decided to visit the small community center near the middle of town. The building was old but welcoming, with wooden floors and windows that looked out onto the snowy streets. The manager, a friendly person who had known the pianist for years, listened to the idea with interest. "You're welcome to use the small meeting room," the manager offered kindly. "It's free during winter evenings, and I think people would really enjoy this. Music brings comfort in ways we sometimes forget." With the room available, the pianist felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. They created a simple flyer, not fancy, just a warm invitation that said everyone was welcome to join an evening of classical music and quiet conversation. They posted the flyers around town at the bakery, the library, the small grocery store, and even near the bus stop. The pianist didn't expect a large gathering. They simply hoped a few people would come. When the evening arrived, the pianist walked to the community center with their small speaker and a handwritten list of pieces to share. They felt their heart beating a little faster, wondering if anyone would show up. The room was quiet when they entered. The chairs were set in a circle. The soft glow from the lamps made the place feel cozy. A few minutes before the scheduled time, the door opened. The first person to walk in was an older woman who lived a few houses away. She smiled gently and took a seat. Soon after, a teenager arrived, carrying a notebook. Then a young father walked in with his 10-year-old daughter. A local shop worker came next, followed by two people the pianist had seen around town, but never spoken to. By the time the clock reached the hour, nearly a dozen people had gathered. The pianist took a quiet breath before greeting everyone. They explained that the meeting wasn't a formal event, just a space where music and stories could be shared. People nodded with warm expressions. The pianist played the first piece, a soft melody filled with emotion. As the music floated through the room, everyone listened silently. Some closed their eyes. Others stared at the floor with thoughtful expressions. The music seemed to fill the air with warmth, creating a peaceful atmosphere that made the room feel like a shelter from the cold world outside. When the piece ended, no one spoke at first. Then the older woman lifted her hand slightly. "This reminds me of my childhood," she said softly. "My mother used to play this on an old record. We didn't have much back then, but those evenings were some of the warmest memories I have." Her voice held a tender honesty that touched everyone in the room. The teenager spoke next. "I listen to this when I study," they admitted shyly. "It helps me focus. But I never knew it had such deep meaning for others." The young father shared a story about how he used to listen to classical pieces. Late at night while taking care of his newborn daughter, "It kept me calm," he said, with a small laugh. Those were long nights, but the music made them easier. One by one, people shared small pieces of their lives, connecting memories to melodies. Some stories were simple. Some were emotional. Some were quiet confessions of moments they had never spoken about before. The pianist listened closely, feeling humbled by the openness in the room. They had expected people to enjoy the music, but they didn't expect such heartfelt stories. It felt like the music had given everyone permission to speak, to reflect, to be honest with themselves. As the evening continued, the pianist played several more pieces. With each melody, the room grew warmer, not in temperature, but in spirit. People leaned forward, nodded, smiled, and sometimes wiped away quiet tears. There was no judgment, no pressure, no need to impress anyone. It was simply humans sharing life through music. When the meeting finally ended, people thanked the pianist warmly. Some lingered a bit, hesitant to leave the peaceful space. A few asked when the next gathering would be. Walking home through the snow, the pianist felt lighter than they had in a long time. Their breath formed small clouds in the cold air, but their heart felt warm. They had started something meaningful, something that touched people in a deeply human way. The following week, the gathering grew. More people had heard about it through neighbors and friends. This time, the room was filled with nearly 20 people. At the next one, even more came. The pianist realized that people weren't just coming for the music, they were coming for connection. During winter, when days were short and nights stretched long, loneliness could settle quietly into people's lives. The music gatherings gave everyone a place to breathe, to feel, to remember, and to share without fear. The pianist noticed how some attendees changed over the weeks. The older woman, who always sat quietly in the corner, began smiling more. The teenager, who once seemed shy, started asking thoughtful questions about the melodies. The young father brought his daughter again, and this time she raised her hand to share a small story about how a piece reminded her of drawing pictures at home. The pianist watched all of this, the gentle sense of gratitude. They hadn't created something grand or complicated. They had simply opened a door. People had walked through it willingly. Every gathering left. The pianist with a deeper appreciation for the power of music. They realized classical music wasn't just about instruments or beautiful notes. It was about the emotions it stirred, the memories it carried, and the connections it built between people who might never have spoken otherwise. One night, as the final piece of the evening faded away, a quiet silence settled over the room. The pianist could see the calm on everyone's faces. It was the kind of silence that felt full, not empty, a silence that held understanding. The pianist thanked everyone for attending, and as people stood to leave, one of the attendees paused near the door. "This has become the best part of my winter," they said softly. "It brings peace I didn't know I needed." The pianist carried those words home like a small treasure, back at their house. The pianist sat near the window again, watching the snow fall under the streetlights. The night was quiet, but the pianist felt a gentle excitement growing inside. They had always seen music as something personal, something that shaped their own life. Now they understood it had the power to shape many lives. Winter had always brought calm, but this winter was different. This winter was creating bonds, stirring memories, and giving people a reason to step out of their routines and share pieces of their hearts. And at the center of it all was music, simple, timeless, and deeply human. The pianist knew this was just the beginning. There were still many melodies to explore, many stories to hear, and many quiet moments waiting to unfold. And they were ready to continue. One gathering at a time, one piece at a time, letting winter guide them gently forward. The next morning started with a soft glow coming through the thin curtains, and for a moment everything felt calm. It was one of those mornings where the world outside seems half asleep, as if giving you time to gather your thoughts before the day begins. I sat at the edge of the bed and tried to steady myself. The last few days had been heavy, filled with moments that made me rethink everything: my past, my future, and even the people I had trusted for so long. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. The silence in the room felt different now. It wasn't empty, and it wasn't lonely either. It felt more like the quiet right before something breaks open and reveals the truth you've been trying to avoid. I leaned against the counter, slowly sipping the water, and stared at the small calendar on the wall. The date didn't matter, but it still felt like some sort of turning point. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps outside the door. They were slow and gentle, almost hesitant. I knew who it was before the knock even came. When I opened the door, I saw my friend standing there with a look that mixed concern and determination. He didn't need to say anything. The expression on his face already told me that he understood more than I had expected. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside and nodded. He walked in slowly, taking in the room the way someone does when they're trying to understand what has changed since the last time they were there. He placed a small paper bag on the table and said he brought breakfast because he knew I probably hadn't eaten. We sat down, and for a few moments neither of us spoke. The air felt heavy with things that needed to be said. I finally broke the silence. "I didn't expect you so early," I said. "I figured you might need someone around." He replied softly. I looked at him and wondered how he always managed to read me better than I read myself. Even when I tried to stay strong or pretend everything was fine, he always found the cracks. He had this calm presence that never pressured me or made me feel judged. We talked for a while about small things: the weather, a strange show he had watched the night before, the new neighbor who always left their porch light on. But both of us knew we were slowly circling around the real topic. When he finally leaned back in his chair, his tone grew serious. "You're still carrying everything alone, aren't you?" he said. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My silence was enough. He reached out and tapped his fingers lightly on the table, a habit he had whenever he was thinking deeply. After a moment, he spoke again. You don't have to keep doing that. You know that, right? I looked down at the table, avoiding his eyes because I knew if I met his gaze, something inside me might crumble. It's just easier sometimes, I whispered. Easier, he repeated, or just familiar. That question stung. Not because it was harsh, but because it was true. I had spent so much time trying to deal with things alone that I didn't even know what it felt like to fully depend on someone anymore. My friend stood up and walked toward the living room. I followed him and we sat down on the couch. He spoke with a steady voice that felt grounding. You don't have to tell me everything right now. I'm not here to push you, but I'm not going anywhere, okay? I nodded. I felt the words hit deeper than I expected. After a few minutes, I told him about the message I had received the night before, how someone from my past had reached out unexpectedly, bringing back memories and fears I had worked so hard to bury. I explained how it felt as if all the progress I had made had suddenly become fragile again. He listened without interrupting, without trying to fill the silence or fix anything. He just listened, and that alone made things feel a little lighter. You've come a long way, he said after I finished. Don't let one moment make you forget that. I leaned back into the couch and closed my eyes for a moment. His words weren't dramatic or loud, but they carried a weight I needed. The day moved slowly after that. We made tea, talked about a few memories from years ago, and even laughed at some small things. But every now and then, my thoughts drifted to what might happen next. The unknown had a way of creeping into the edges of my mind. In the afternoon, we decided to take a walk. The air outside felt cool and fresh, and the street was quiet. As we walked, he kept a steady pace beside me, not rushing, not lagging. At one point, he told me a story about someone he once knew who had gone through something similar. Not to compare, but to remind me that people can rebuild even after moments that feel impossible. You're stronger than you think, he said as we reached the end of the block. Sometimes I don't feel like it, I admitted. Strength doesn't always feel like strength, he said. Sometimes it just feels like showing up. The sun was setting when we returned to the house. The sky had a soft orange glow, and the quiet felt peaceful rather than heavy. I stood by the door for a moment, watching the colors change slowly. Inside, I finally felt a little more grounded. I knew the problems weren't gone. The past wasn't erased, but something felt different, like maybe I could face things without falling apart this time. As my friend got ready to leave, he paused at the door. Call me if anything happens, he said. Even if it's late, I will, I replied. He gave a small smile and left. I closed the door and stood there for a long moment. The room felt quiet again, but the silence no longer felt threatening. It felt like the beginning of something, not a solution. It's not a perfect ending, but a moment where things start shifting in a better direction. Later that night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The street light outside cast a soft glow across the room. My thoughts still drifted toward worry at times. But now there was something else mixed, in a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in days. I knew that tomorrow might bring more challenges. There might be more messages, more thoughts I didn't want to face, and more moments where I felt unsure. But for the first time in a while, I didn't feel like I had to go through it alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. I finished my tea and took a deep breath. The night felt calm, and the world outside seemed to settle into its own rhythm. As I got ready for bed, I felt a small but steady sense of hope. Not the loud kind. Not the sudden kind, just the quiet kind that grows slowly, like a soft light finding its way through a closed curtain. And for the first time in a long time, that quiet hope felt real. The morning arrived slowly, almost as if the world wanted to give a little extra time before the day truly began. The sky outside the window was pale and still, with a soft winter brightness that felt gentle rather than cold. The quiet in the room carried a sense of promise, like something was shifting quietly beneath the surface. For the first time in many days, waking up didn't feel heavy. I sat up slowly and let my feet rest on the floor. The air felt crisp, but not uncomfortable. It felt like the kind of morning that invites you to breathe a little deeper and think a little clearer. I rubbed my hands together and looked around the room. It still looked the same, but somehow everything felt different inside me. My phone lay on the nightstand, silent. I stared at it for a moment, expecting to see another unexpected message or something that would pull me right back into worry. But there was nothing. The screen was dark and calm, letting me know that today wasn't demanding anything from me yet. I stood up and walked into the kitchen. As I reached for the kettle, I felt a quiet sense of gratitude. Not for a specific thing, but for the simple fact that I had made it through yesterday without breaking apart. The support, the conversation, the small reminders that I wasn't alone, they had settled somewhere inside me. While the kettle warmed, I stood by the counter with both hands resting on the cool surface. My thoughts drifted to the message from the past, the one that had stirred everything inside me. The fear still existed, but it didn't have the same grip as before. Now, there was also understanding, and a small voice reminding me that I wasn't the same person I had been back then. As the water boiled, I made tea and walked toward the window. Outside, people were moving around slowly, bundled in coats, their breath floating like small clouds in the cold air. Watching them gave me a quiet sense of comfort. Life was still happening, and I was still part of it. I took a sip of tea and felt its warmth spread gently through me. In that moment, I realized something important. I didn't have to rush any decisions. I didn't have to respond to anything from the past until I felt ready. And readiness wasn't something that needed to happen all at once. It could grow slowly, like the morning light. A light knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. It wasn't surprising, though. Somehow, I already knew who it would be. When I opened the door, my friend stood there again, but this time with a more relaxed expression. He held 2 cups of coffee in a cardboard holder. "Thought you might want this," he said with a small smile. I stepped aside and let him in. He placed the coffee on the table and looked around, probably checking if I seemed more grounded today. And I did, at least more than yesterday. "How are you feeling?" he asked. I thought for a moment, then answered honestly, "Better. Not perfect, but better." He nodded as if he expected that. We sat in the living room, each holding our drink. Neither of us rushed into conversation, but the silence this time wasn't heavy. It was comfortable, a kind of silence shared by people who didn't need to fill every second with words. After a few minutes, he leaned forward. "So, what's the plan today?" he asked. I shrugged lightly. "I'm not sure yet. Maybe think things through. Maybe just breathe." "Both sound good," he replied. We talked for a bit about normal things, the weather, what he needed to do later, a funny moment he had experienced on the way here. Every simple thing helped me feel a little more like myself again. At one point, I finally picked up my phone. My friend noticed, but didn't say anything. I unlocked it and opened the message that had shaken me so deeply. My heart still tightened a bit, but not as much as yesterday. "Do you want to answer it?" he asked gently. I shook my head. "Not now. I will one day, but not today." "That's fine," he said. "You don't owe anyone a reaction before you're ready." We spent more of the morning talking, and slowly, something inside me began to settle. It was like the emotional fog had started lifting. Not completely, but enough for me to see things more clearly. Around midday, he offered to take me somewhere quiet at a park he liked visiting because it was peaceful and open. I agreed. The idea of being outside felt right. The park wasn't crowded. A soft winter breeze brushed past us as we walked along the pathway. The trees were bare, their branches stretching toward the sky like delicate lines sketched against the pale clouds. A few birds chirped softly, filling the quiet with small notes of life. We sat on a bench overlooking a small frozen pond. Children were playing in the distance, their laughter drifting across the air. I watched them for a while, feeling something gentle stir inside me. "You ever think about how different life looks when you're a kid?" I asked. My friend chuckled. "All the time. Everything feels bigger then. And simpler." "Yeah," I murmured. "Sometimes I wish things could go back to feeling that simple." He turned toward me. "Maybe not simple, but maybe clearer. And I think you're already moving in that direction." His words sat with me for a moment. They didn't erase anything, but they calmed something inside me. As we sat quietly, I realized something important. This moment, simple as it was, mattered. Not because it solved anything, but because it gave me space to breathe, to feel human, to feel supported, to feel the world around me instead of the weight inside my chest. We stayed at the park for a while, just talking, walking, and sometimes sitting in silence. Every passing minute felt like another step toward healing. When we eventually returned home, the sky had shifted again, carrying soft hints of evening. The colors were gentle, blending into one another like the calm notes in a classical piece, steady, comforting. Inside, I felt lighter. Not free from everything, but more in control. More aware of my own strength. My friend stood by the door before leaving and said, "You're doing better than you think, and you're not alone, no matter what happens next." This time, I didn't just nod. I met his eyes and said, "Thank you, really." After he left, I walked to the window again. The street was quiet now, touched by the first hints of night. I stood there for a long time, letting the silence fill the room. Then I sat down with my phone again, not to answer the message, but to finally acknowledge that it no longer controlled me. The past wasn't gone, but it didn't own me either. I put the phone aside and took a deep breath, for the first time in a long while. I felt something warm inside me. Not fear, not confusion, not sadness, but a calm, a winter calm, soft, steady, alive, the kind that classical music carries, the quiet kind that doesn't demand attention, but stays with you long after the last note fades.